When I moved into the apartment, the city view captivated me. The horizon stretched out like a living painting, filled with twinkling lights and the incessant movement of people and vehicles. It was a scene that promised new opportunities, a fresh start. But behind the urban beauty, a strange feeling of discomfort haunted me, like a shadow that refused to fade away. The sensation was so palpable that I could see it dancing at the edge of my vision, a constant reminder that change is not always welcome. I need to get used to this, I murmured to myself as I organized the still stacked moving boxes in the living room. The sound of cardboard scraping against the floor echoed like a warning, and I tried to ignore the restlessness that invaded me. Just a new apartment, nothing more, I thought, gazing out the window. The wind swayed the curtains, and for a moment, I lost myself in the landscape, taking a deep breath and trying to convince myself that everything would be fine. However, the first night brought with it an oppressive silence. As I lay down, the calm of the apartment seemed to morph into something more sinister. The distant sound of sirens and the murmur of the city now felt like a dark lullaby, and I found myself waking up several times, the sensation of being watched growing with each breath. That's when I saw her, a silhouette in the window of the opposite building. My heart raced in my chest, and a chill ran down my spine. The figure was indistinct, a shadow against the yellowish light of the lamps, but I could feel her eyes on me, as if they were piercing my soul. It's just your imagination, I told myself, trying to shake off the unease. But when I looked again, the figure had vanished. The emptiness of the opposite window left me even more unsettled. I got out of bed and walked over to the window, trying to see more closely, but all I found was the echo of my own face reflected in the glass. Maybe I just need some rest, I thought, returning to bed. But sleep wouldn't come. Shadows danced around me, and the figure in the window continued to haunt me. The next morning, I decided I needed to distract myself. Work awaited, and I needed a routine. As I got ready, I couldn't help but reflect on the silhouette. What could it be? A neighbor, perhaps? Or just a trick of the light? As I walked to the subway, I tried to push the thoughts away, but the image of the figure still lingered in my mind, like a dark cloud. The city was alive, but I felt as though I were walking through a dream, a world where everything was a little distorted. At the office, concentration became a challenge. The words on the screen danced, and I found myself staring out the window, searching for a sign of that figure. My colleagues noticed my distraction. "Hey, you okay? You seem a bit out of it today," Mia, one of my co-workers, commented. She had a warm demeanor, and her concern felt genuine. "Oh, just a bit of insomnia," I replied, trying to smile. "Nothing a coffee can't fix." But the truth was, I felt a growing pressure in my chest, as if something was about to happen, something I couldn't quite understand. "You should relax a bit, maybe go out for happy hour later," suggested Mia, but I just shook my head, smiling without much conviction. The idea of going out felt distant, like a possibility I couldn't reach. Instead, I continued working, the image of the silhouette always lurking in my mind, like an echo. When I finally got home, twilight enveloped the city in its golden light. I was exhausted, but the thought of lying down and facing the night terrified me. What lurked behind the walls of my new home? What did that figure want from me? I tried to convince myself it was just a hallucination, but doubt rooted itself deeper in my heart. I decided to prepare a simple dinner, and as I chopped vegetables, the feeling of being watched returned to assail me. I looked out the window, but this time I saw nothing. Just the city stretching out before me, life pulsating outside. The phone rang, and I answered, feeling a bit of relief. "Hi, it's Clara. How are you adjusting to the new place?" My friend's voice brought a touch of comfort. "Hi, Clara. I'm trying to get used to it, but it's strange. It feels like something's watching me, and I don't know how to explain it," I confessed, laughing nervously. "You've been watching too many horror movies, haven't you? It could just be your imagination. Give yourself some time, you'll settle in, she replied with a light laugh, but I wasn't so sure. After hanging up, night approached, and I realized I needed to confront my fears. The figure in the window wouldn't leave my mind unless I faced it. I took a deep breath and went to the window again. The air was cool, and the city sparkled under the night lights. But the feeling of discomfort persisted. It wasn't just the fear of the unknown, it was a deep intuition telling me that something was wrong, something I needed to uncover. The night wore on, and solitude settled into my apartment. The image of the silhouette continued to haunt my thoughts, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was more than just a reflection of my own insecurities. It was as if she wanted to tell me something, as if she were trapped in a cycle that prevented her from moving on. And I was becoming part of that cycle, increasingly entangled in a story that seemed to transcend the simple act of moving into a new apartment. As I prepared for bed, I looked out the window once more, hoping the figure would appear again. But the city was quiet, and I found myself alone in my own space. I decided that when I woke up, I would investigate the history of the building, in search of answers that, somehow, would free me from that discomfort that followed me like a shadow. The night dragged on, and I finally managed to fall asleep, but my mind was filled with unanswered questions, and the echo of the city resonating in my soul. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window of my new apartment, but the sense of discomfort still accompanied me. The city pulsed outside, full of life and noise, but the image of the silhouette in the window of the opposite building was still fresh in my mind, like a persistent shadow. I needed a bit of normalcy, so I decided to explore the building and meet the neighbors. That's how I met Agnes. The first time I saw her, she was at her apartment door, wearing a floral apron and holding a cup of tea. She had white hair and a gentle expression, but her eyes seemed to harbor many secrets. "Good morning, dear. You must be the new tenant," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Agnes, your neighbor from upstairs." "Hi, Agnes. I'm Anna. I just moved in here." I tried to smile back, but the feeling of strangeness was still present. "I'm just trying to get used to everything." "Oh, the first day is always the hardest. But don't worry, you'll soon feel at home here." She hesitated for a moment, as if weighing something. "Have you heard about the strange events that happened in this building?" "Strange events?" I asked, curious and a bit apprehensive. "What do you mean?" Agnes looked around, as if she wanted to ensure no one was listening. "Well, a few years ago, a woman disappeared from here. Nobody knows what happened to her. She was a very beautiful young woman, and since then, people have felt a strange presence." A chill ran down my spine. It was as if she were recounting a horror movie, but the reality was much more disturbing. "Do you know her name?" "Yes, it was Clara. Clara Montero. She lived here for a while, and one day, she simply didn't come home. People said they saw her for the last time near the window of your apartment." Agnes paused, observing my reaction. "Many believe her spirit still haunts this place." "That's scary." I tried to laugh, but I couldn't hide the unease in my voice. "Do you know more details about what happened?" "Only what I read in the newspapers." Agnes stepped back a little, as if trying to remember. "They say she was involved in a troubled relationship. ####. Some people believe she was murdered, but they never found the body." As Agnes spoke, the pieces of the story began to come together in my mind. The silhouette I had seen in the window, the feeling of being watched, everything seemed to connect. "And you, Agnes? Did you know Clara?" "Oh, dear, I was her friend. A sweet girl, but very lost. She had big dreams but also many fears. I always thought she deserved more than what this place could offer." Her gaze drifted into the distance, as if she were reliving painful memories. "But you need to be careful. There are things we prefer to forget, secrets that should not be revealed." "Secrets?" I couldn't help my curiosity. "What do you mean by that?" Agnes seemed to hesitate again, her eyes narrowing. There are things that were left behind, things that might be better left in the past. But if you feel you need to know, the truth may not be as simple as it seems. I talked to Agnes for a while longer, absorbing her stories about the building and the strange things that had happened. After some time, I said goodbye and returned to my apartment, my mind racing. The idea of investigating Clara Montero's story became an obsession. Agnes's words echoed in my mind, and I needed to understand what had really happened. That night, I sat at my desk and began to research. The computer illuminated the small space of my apartment as I dove into pages of old news articles. With each new piece of information, the feeling that Clara's story was intertwined with my own grew stronger. Her face, though I had never seen it, felt familiar. The search intensified. I discovered that Clara had been a promising artist, someone who dreamed of exhibiting her work in galleries. But there were also rumors about her personal life. Her relationship with a man named Jake was mentioned in several articles. The descriptions were vague, but I felt there was more behind the story. The next day, I returned to the local library, determined to uncover everything I could about Clara Montero. The shelves were filled with books and old newspapers, and I spent hours flipping through each page, looking for something that could provide clues about her disappearance. The smell of aged paper filled the air, and the words on the pages seemed to whisper secrets. I found a clipping that caught my attention. It was a photo of Clara, with a bright smile and eyes that seemed radiant. The article talked about her last art exhibition and mentioned that she was excited about the opportunities that would arise. But the last lines of the text spoke of her sudden absence and the despair of friends and family searching for her. She was so full of life, I murmured to myself, feeling a strange connection with that woman I had never known. What could have happened to her? Why would someone so talented and full of dreams simply disappear? I lost track of time in the library, and when I finally decided to return to my apartment, anxiety was growing in my chest. The idea that someone might be watching me felt more real every day. When I entered my home, a chill ran down my spine. The room was silent, but the feeling that something was about to happen hung in the air. However, what happened next left me even more intrigued. While I was getting ready for bed, I heard the doorbell ring. It was Agnes, with a serious look on her face and an envelope in her hand. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Anna, but I found something you need to see." She extended the envelope, and I took it, nervous. "Inside, you will find newspaper clippings that may help in your search." "Thank you, Agnes. I really needed more information about Clara." I opened the envelope and began to examine the papers. Among them was an old photo of Clara, and next to it, an address that seemed to belong to an abandoned place. "What is this?" Agnes looked at me with a mix of concern and determination. "That place used to be her apartment. They say there are still things there that can help you understand what really happened." Adrenaline rushed through my body. The idea of going there was terrifying but also irresistible. "Can you come with me?" I don't know if that's a good idea." Agnes hesitated, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "Please, Agnes. I need you. I can't do this alone." The plea came out more fervently than I intended, but the urgency of the situation propelled me. "All right. But we need to be careful. There are things that may be better left in the past." She took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for what was to come. With the address in hand and the determination to uncover the truth, we headed to the location. The walk to the abandoned building was silent, the tension in the air almost palpable. As we approached, a sense of déjà vu washed over me, as if that place had been waiting for me. When we arrived, the building was covered in dust and cobwebs, an echo of what had once been a home. My heart raced as I entered, feeling Clara's presence in every corner. Agnes followed closely behind, her eyes alert. "Be careful, Anna. We don't know what we might find here." Her voice was a whisper, but I could feel the weight of her words. As we explored the space, I found objects that seemed to belong to Clara, like paintbrushes and unfinished canvases. It was as if I were stepping into her world, a world that had been abruptly interrupted. The connection between us grew stronger with each passing moment. "Look!" Agnes pointed to a door at the end of the hallway that seemed forgotten by time. "Maybe it's in there." Hesitation gripped me, but curiosity was stronger. We opened the door and found a dusty room, with furniture covered in white sheets. A table in the center caught my attention. On it, I found a partially burned diary. "This must be hers," I exclaimed, carefully picking up the diary. The cover was damaged, but the pages were still legible. As I opened it, the smell of burnt paper filled the air. As I read the entries, I realized that Clara also felt she was being watched. Her words were filled with fear and solitude. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. The nightmare had been vivid, almost tangible. I saw the missing woman, her lost eyes pleading for help as shadows enveloped her. The feeling that she was trying to communicate with me was undeniable, as if, in some strange way, our fates were intertwined. I got out of bed, my feet touching the cold floor. I looked out the window, but the city was still wrapped in a shroud of darkness, and the silhouette that haunted me was gone. Yet the feeling of unease lingered, like a cold breeze that wouldn't leave me in peace. That morning, as I prepared for work, the image of the woman and her pleas still echoed in my mind. The coffee tasted bitter, and I could barely swallow the toast. What was happening to me? I couldn't simply ignore the connection forming between me and that mysterious being. With one last look at my reflection in the window, I left the apartment, determined not to let the shadows take over. At the office, the atmosphere was tense. Jake, my co-worker, seemed more hostile than usual. The interactions that once were cordial now carried a subtle disdain. I tried to focus on my tasks, but the figure of the woman remained in my mind, a persistent image distracting me. When Jake approached, his low, sarcastic voice sliced through the air. "You seem a bit distracted, don't you think?" "Is everything okay?" he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine, Jake. Just a little tired." "A lot on my mind," I replied, trying to stay composed. But the truth was, I was far from okay. The confusion about the missing woman and what might have happened to her was consuming me. "Be careful not to let that affect your performance," he murmured, and I felt a wave of discomfort wash over me. ####. There was something in his voice that made me uneasy, as if he were enjoying my state. At lunchtime, I went to the park near the office, trying to clear my mind. I sat on a bench under a tree, the sun filtering through the leaves, warming my face. But the peace was fleeting, the image of the woman persisted, and the nightmares that haunted me at night were becoming routine. It was as if she were calling me, and I just couldn't understand what she wanted. With a deep sigh, I headed to the local library after work. I knew I needed answers. The shelves were filled with books, but what I was really looking for was something more. My heart raced when I found a record about the building I lived in. Flipping through the pages, I read about various strange experiences reported by previous residents. But one story, in particular, caught my attention, the disappearance of a woman whose name I couldn't forget. That night, as I tried to sleep, the nightmares grew more intense. I was once again in her presence, her eyes were locked on mine, and the pain in her gaze was undeniable. I felt her desperation, as if she were trapped in an endless cycle of anguish. When I finally woke up, breathless and with a racing heart, I realized I could no longer ignore the connection. I needed to know more. The next day, I decided to talk to Agnes, the elderly neighbor who seemed to know the building's secrets. When I found her in the hallway, her gaze was wise and perceptive. "Agnes, can you tell me more about the woman who disappeared here?" I asked, my voice trembling with anticipation. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes shining with a distant memory. "Oh, dear, do you really want to know?" The things that happened here are scarier than you can imagine. Please, I need to know. I feel there's something more, something that connects me to her, I implored. She was named Beatrice, Agnes began, her voice soft but marked by sadness. She was a lively young woman, but there was something dark in her life. Many said she was being watched, stalked by someone who meant her harm. And then one day, she simply vanished. Her words echoed in my mind. Do you know who could have done this? Agnes shook her head, her expression growing darker. No one knew for sure. But there were rumors about a man, someone she knew. He was always nearby, but after she disappeared, he vanished along with her, as if he had never existed. A discomfort grew inside me. Something about her description felt familiar. What did I not know? What was hidden in the shadows? That night, the visions of the woman became clearer than ever. She was there, at the window, her presence now undeniable. The image of her eyes, filled with pain and longing, kept me restless. What did she want from me? What could I do to help her? Why don't you tell me what's happening? I spoke aloud, even though I knew it was just me and solitude in my apartment. Silence echoed back, but the figure at the window seemed closer, as if she were approaching me, silently asking for help. That night, on a whim, I decided I needed to confront what was haunting me. I was no longer a passive observer, I had to act. The image of the woman guided me, and I knew I needed to understand what had happened to her. With renewed determination, I would follow her in search of the truth, even if it meant facing what was hidden in the shadows. The next morning, I returned to see Agnes. I need more information about Beatrice. Something tells me she's trying to communicate with me, I said, urgency in my voice. Dear, that could be dangerous, Agnes warned, her gaze intense. Sometimes, the shadows don't want you to discover the truth. But I couldn't back down. I need to know, Agnes. I can't go on like this. I feel there's something I should understand. She sighed, seeming to weigh her words. Then you must prepare. What you discover may not be pleasant. Beatrice had a secret, something that haunted her until the end. And if you are connected to it, well, you may also be in danger. A chill ran down my spine, but the determination in my heart was stronger. I'm willing to take the risk. I need to know the truth. Agnes nodded slowly, as if deciding whether to share more than she was willing. Then we need to go back to her past. Her diary, if it still exists, may hold the answers you seek. She had a diary? I asked, my mind buzzing with new possibilities. Yes, but it was never found. They say it's hidden somewhere, but no one knows where. If you can find it, you might understand what happened. Agnes's words echoed in my mind as the conversation unfolded. What I was about to discover could change everything. I wouldn't give up. The woman at the window was calling me, and I was ready to unravel the secrets that kept her trapped in the shadows. The local library had a distinctive smell of aged paper and polished wood, a place that always drew me in with its tranquil atmosphere. I walked there after work, determined to uncover more about the missing woman. The place was nearly empty, except for an elderly lady flipping through a book in the history section. The silence was interrupted only by the sound of my shoes tapping on the wooden floor. I searched for a spot at a study table where I could focus. As I opened one of the available computers, the screen illuminated my face, and soon I found myself typing the woman's name, Marina Lopez. The results piled up. Articles about her disappearance, accounts from neighbors, and a series of mystery blog posts. But one title caught my attention, The Scandal of the Bella Vista Building. Without hesitation, I clicked and began to read. The article spoke of an incident that had occurred years ago, involving the death of a man and the suspicion that he had been murdered. Marina was mentioned as a witness, but something told me there was more to the story. What had really happened? Why had she disappeared? Hi, are you okay? The soft voice of a librarian pulled me from my thoughts. I looked up to find her watching me with a concerned expression. Yes, I'm just a bit intrigued by this story, I replied, trying to explain the situation. She smiled gently. Stories of disappearances always draw us in, don't they? If you need help, I'll be around. I thanked her and continued my search. After a few hours of sifting through old clippings and digital archives, my mind was overloaded with information. Deciding to take a break, I stretched and noticed a shelf in the back that seemed to hold older books. Curious, I got up and walked over. As I browsed the books, something shiny on the highest shelf caught my eye. It was a diary, dusty and with a worn leather cover. With a surge of impulse, I reached up and pulled it down. As I opened it, I saw that the pages were yellowed, but the handwriting was legible. It was Marina's diary. Did you find something interesting? The librarian asked, appearing by my side again. It looks like it's her diary. I can't believe I found it here. Emotion flooded my body. I needed to read it, I needed to understand what had happened. You can stay here until we close, but please don't take it outside, the librarian said with a sympathetic smile. I nodded and sat at one of the tables, diving into the pages. Marina's entries were a mix of intimate thoughts and accounts of everyday events. But on some pages, I noticed the atmosphere shifted. She wrote about feeling watched, and a chill ran down my spine. I can't go on like this, she wrote. I feel like someone is always watching me. Sometimes, I think it's just paranoia, but something tells me it's not. The truth is closer than I imagine. With each line, my heart raced. What did she know? Why had no one discovered this information before? Hashtag. I continued reading and noticed that, in one entry, Marina described a meeting with someone mysterious in the building. The fear was evident in her words, and the urgency she conveyed made my body tense. He said I shouldn't meddle in matters that didn't concern me, I read aloud, without realizing it. But I can't ignore what I saw. I can't stay silent. The light in the library began to dim as the sun set, and the atmosphere around me grew heavier. What had she seen? What was about to happen? I needed answers. I decided I would go back to my apartment and talk to Agnes. She knew more about the building's history and might help me understand what was happening. I carefully closed the diary, as if I were safeguarding a precious secret, and walked over to the librarian. Thank you for your help. I'm going to take this home now. I smiled at her, trying to hide the agitation I felt inside. Of course, but remember, it's delicate material. Take good care of it, she said, with a knowing look. I left the library, clutching the diary against my chest, as I walked through the streets illuminated by the warm glow of street lamps. The journey to my building felt eternal, and anxiety built within me. What else would I discover about Marina? Upon arriving, the discomfort returned. The darkness seemed to intensify, as if the building were absorbing the light around me. I climbed the stairs, and as I opened the door to my apartment, a cold breeze enveloped me. The window was ajar, and a sense of urgency washed over me. I decided I needed to see that figure again. I approached the window and looked across to the opposite building. The silence was deafening, and my heart raced in my chest. That night, everything seemed to align, as if the pieces of a puzzle were finally coming together. And then, there she was. The silhouette I had seen before. Now, the figure was clearer, as if beckoning me. But it was different this time. There was a profound sadness in her expression, something that made my heart ache. Marina? I called, even though I knew it was impossible for her to hear me. But the connection I felt was undeniable. At that moment, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Agnes, who had knocked on the door. Hi, dear. Are you okay? She asked, with a worried look. Agnes. Come here, you need to see this. I pointed to the window, but when I looked again, the figure had vanished. Oh, you saw the figure again, didn't you? Agnes said, with a tone that mixed concern and understanding. I knew this would happen. You must prepare yourself. Prepare for what? I asked, intrigued. To uncover the truth, she replied, leaving the statement hanging in the air. I found her diary at the library. She knew she was being watched, Agnes. I feel like she's trying to communicate with me. Agnes moved closer to the window, looking out at the opposite building. She's not the only one. Many people in our building have felt this. Marina had a special gift, a sensitivity that made her unique. But why did this happen? What did she discover? What happened to her? I rushed to ask, but Agnes just shook her head. This is a long story full of secrets. It's not easy to talk about. But you need to understand that the truth can be painful. I felt a chill in my stomach. I'm ready, Agnes. I need to know. I can't ignore this. She took a deep breath and began to tell. Marina was a young woman full of dreams. She was involved with someone who loved her, but there were also shadows in her life. Her friendships with some people in the building were complex, and there were rumors of a secret she kept. A secret that could change everything. A secret? What was it? I asked, eager. I can't share everything right now. But you must remember that those who leave often have untold stories. Sometimes, we need to be brave to face what's left behind. Those words echoed in my mind. I was willing to face whatever it was. After a long day of discoveries, my heart raced, and the shadows of the past seemed to close in. I will uncover the truth, Agnes. I won't stop until I do. She smiled, but worry still lingered in her gaze. Be careful, my dear. The truth can be darker than you imagine. And the line between what is real and what is merely an echo of memories can blur. With that, I said goodbye to Agnes, and as she left, an intense determination formed within me. I needed to understand what was happening, and to do that, I had to dive into the mysteries surrounding Marina. The answers were out there, and I was ready to find them. The day dawned overcast, as if the sky reflected the confusion I felt inside. The image of the vanished woman still hammered in my mind, like a persistent echo that refused to quiet. I got out of bed, and as I prepared for the day, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I needed to know more about her, about what had really happened. The connection to the woman was growing ever more intense, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. After a few minutes of hesitation, I decided to go to the local library. The thought of delving deeper into the story of the building and the woman who had become a shadow in my life was daunting, but I was determined. As I walked through the streets, the cold breeze seemed to whisper secrets, and with each step, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I glanced back a few times, but there was no one. Just the city, indifferent to my torment. Upon arriving at the library, the smell of old books and yellowed paper wrapped around me. It was a place that had always felt welcoming, but now it seemed like a maze of mysteries. I headed to the newspaper section, where I hoped to find something that could help me understand what had happened. As I ran my fingers across the dusty pages, a headline caught my eye: Mysterious Disappearance in the Aurora Building. My heart raced. This must be the story, I thought. I began to flip through the pages in search of more information. With each article I read, more disturbing details emerged. Accounts from neighbors who heard screams, strange silhouettes in the windows, and a sense that something was very wrong in the building. The missing woman was the central figure in all these stories. After some time, an elderly librarian approached me. She had thick-framed glasses and a gentle expression. "You seem very interested in this story, young man," she said, glancing at the pages I was examining. "Can I help you with anything?" "Yes, please. I'm trying to find out more about a woman who disappeared in the Aurora Building. Her name was, well, I don't know her name, but there seem to be many strange reports about the building," I replied, feeling the anxiety that consumed me was about to explode. "Oh, Her story is quite well known around here. Unfortunately, it's not the first time we've heard of disappearances and strange events in that place. But what you really need to know is that she had a diary. Something that was never found, the librarian said, her gaze drifting into distant thoughts. A diary? Do you know where I can find more information about it? I asked, intrigued. Unfortunately, the diary disappeared along with her. But rumors say it contained dark secrets about her life. Some people believe that if the diary were found, it could clarify what happened to her, the librarian replied, her voice low and filled with mystery. The idea that the diary existed sparked new hope within me, but also deep fear. What could this diary reveal? As I said goodbye to the librarian, I was determined to learn more about this woman and, perhaps, find the diary. Thus, I left the library and headed home with my mind full of questions. When I arrived at my apartment, I noticed something different in the air. A sense of anticipation hung over me, as if something was about to happen. I went to the table and turned on my computer. The need to uncover more about the woman and her diary was urgent. I started researching online, using keywords that might lead me to any clues related to her. After a few hours of searching, something unexpected caught my attention. A post in a mystery forum mentioned an old photograph of a woman who had gone missing. The author claimed that the photo contained hints about what might have happened. My heart raced. Maybe it's the same woman, I thought. I need to find that photo, I murmured to myself as I typed frantically. The author of the post had left an email address. I decided to send a message, explaining who I was and that I was seeking information about the missing woman. While I awaited a response, something unexpected happened. The mailman knocked at the door, and when I opened it, I found a mysterious envelope. It was plain, with no return address, but my name was written in handwriting. My heart raced. The envelope seemed to carry a weight, as if it held secrets I was about to uncover. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and found an old photograph of a woman. The image was in black and white, but her expression was clear. She had dark hair and a penetrating gaze that seemed to pierce through time. What shocked me even more was how much she resembled me. On the back of the photo, there was an address that appeared to belong to an abandoned location. This can't be a coincidence, I thought, holding the photo firmly. The connection felt undeniable. My heart raced as a mix of fear and determination settled within me. I need to go there, I decided, and adrenaline began coursing through my veins. That night, as the city was cloaked in darkness, I prepared for the journey. The location indicated by the envelope was only a few blocks from my apartment, and I knew I couldn't delay this search any longer. I grabbed a jacket, tucked the photo into my pocket, and left. The path to the location was eerie, and the streets were deserted. The city lights flickered, casting strange shadows around me. The feeling of being followed intensified, but I couldn't let fear stop me. I arrived at the address and found an old building, covered in dust and forgotten by time. The windows were broken, and the entrance door stood ajar, as if inviting me inside. Here we go, I took a deep breath and pushed the door. The creaking of the hinges echoed in the silence. The interior of the building was in ruins, with furniture covered in dust and the smell of mold permeating the air. Moonlight illuminated the space, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. I walked cautiously down the hallway, feeling that each step brought me closer to a long-held secret. The walls seemed to whisper stories, and I couldn't help but think of the woman in the photo. What had happened to her? What would I find here? Finally, I reached one of the apartments. The door was slightly open, and a strange feeling enveloped me. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The place was abandoned, but there was an air of familiarity that made me uneasy. Looking around, I noticed that the space was filled with objects, old furniture, paintings on the walls, and in the center of the room, a table covered in papers. My heart raced. Approaching the table, I began to sift through the papers. They were letters, notes, and on top of it all, a worn-out notebook. It appeared to be a diary. What I was searching for could be right there, before my eyes. "Please let this be it," I whispered, carefully holding the diary. The cover was torn, and the pages were fragile. I began to flip through, anxious to discover the secrets it held. But just as I was about to read, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, making the pages turn rapidly. "Who's there?" my voice echoed, but only silence replied. The tension in the air was palpable. I knew something was wrong, but my curiosity outweighed my fear. I continued to read, immersed in the woman's thoughts, her hopes, and her fears, when suddenly, a shadow moved in the corner of my eye. I froze. The figure was there, standing still, like a familiar presence. My stomach churned. It felt as though I was being watched, not by a stranger, but by someone I knew. The figure vanished in the blink of an eye, but the sensation of not being alone lingered. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling of panic. The diary was in my hands, and I needed to know what more it would reveal. With my eyes fixed on the pages, I continued to read, determined to uncover the truth, even if it was shrouded in shadows and secrets. The atmosphere inside the abandoned apartment was heavy, almost oppressive. The air was thick with dust and dampness, and the faint light filtering through the broken window illuminated the space in a spectral way. Every step I took on the creaking floor seemed to echo in the silence, as if the place was watching me, guarding its secrets jealously. I felt like an intruder in a world that had long been forgotten. With the photo in hand, I approached an old table, covered with a thick layer of dust. The furniture was filled with objects that seemed to have belonged to a life full of stories. An old, foggy mirror reflected my distorted image, making me feel a pang of discomfort. What happened here? I murmured to myself, as my fingers glided over a music box, its lid slightly open. When I opened it, a soft melody began to play, but it soon stopped, as if the mechanism itself was tired of remembering. Then my eyes landed on something else. A charred journal lay discarded in a corner, as if it had been forgotten amid a fire. My heart raced. I knew that this diary could hold answers, and I quickly approached to pick it up. The cover was singed, but I could still make out some letters. "Clara's diary," I read aloud, and the mention of the name made my stomach turn. Clara, the missing woman. I sat on the dusty floor, leaning against the cold wall. The diary was filled with yellowed and worn pages, but most were damaged. I focused on the parts one could read. "I feel like I'm being watched," one entry said. "The shadows seem to move when I turn around. I don't know if I'm imagining things, but the feeling is real. Sometimes, I hear voices whispering my name. I can't let this consume me, but I can't escape." With each word I read, Clara's desperation seeped into me. I was not alone in my struggle. She felt pursued too, as if something dark lurked in the shadows of her own home. I knew I shouldn't have moved into this building, I continued reading, Clara's voice echoing in my mind. But when I met Jake, everything seemed perfect. He was everything I ever wanted. But now, I feel like I'm losing myself. Something isn't right. The mention of Jake made me pause. I recalled how he had been acting in recent days, as if he was hiding something. What more did Clara know about him? I don't trust him anymore, I continued reading. There's been a change in his gaze, a shadow I can't understand. He promised me the world, but now I feel trapped in a web of lies. My hands trembled as I flipped through the remaining pages, but most were burned or torn, as if someone had tried to destroy her words. "If I disappear, please, someone needs to know the truth," Clara wrote on one of the last legible pages. "I can't live in fear anymore. I need to find a way out before it's too late." Tears began to slide down my face as I absorbed the despair emanating from each word. Clara was trying to reach out to me, as if she knew I was the only one who could help her. My heart ached as I realized she was trapped in a cycle of fear and loneliness, just as I felt. I will find the truth, Clara, I promised aloud, as if she could hear me. I won't let you be forgotten. Hashtag hashtag hashtag. I stood up, determined to discover more, but before I could take a step, a cold sensation ran down my spine. I looked at the window and, in a fleeting reflection, saw a figure. The figure was clearer now, as if it were trying to materialize before me. It was Clara, or at least her image, and her expression was one of pain and despair. Clara! I called out, but the figure seemed to hesitate, held back by the fog that enveloped the room. What do you need me to do? I asked, but Clara's image merely watched me, as though trying to come closer but unable to. The tension in the air was palpable, and I felt something inside me shifting. The connection between us was strengthening, and the line separating the world of the living from the dead seemed to blur. I won't give up on you, I declared firmly, sensing that this promise was not just a matter of honor but a commitment to my own sanity. With the diary in hand, I decided I needed to return to my apartment. Answers were beginning to form, and I needed a safe space to organize them. But before leaving, I turned once more to the window, and Clara's figure was still there, clearer and closer. I will help you. I will uncover the truth, I reaffirmed, and for the first time, I felt Clara's expression start to relax, as if a burden was being lifted from her shoulders. I left the abandoned apartment with my heart racing, but now it wasn't just fear propelling me. It was the determination to find out what had truly happened to my sister and, somehow, help Clara find the peace she needed. With every step I took toward the exit, the feeling that the figure was accompanying me gave me courage. I was not alone on this journey. Clara was with me, and together, we would unravel the secrets that the past tried to bury. I hurried back to my apartment, my mind still buzzing with the discoveries I had made. The burned diary, the objects left behind, and the figure in the window that now seemed so close. When I opened the door, the air was heavy, as if the atmosphere was charged with tension. The silence was deafening. What I didn't expect was to find Jake there, waiting like a shadow. He was leaning against the table, his gaze fixed on me, causing my heart to race. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to hide the surprise in my voice. "I could ask you the same question," he replied, a sarcastic smile on his lips. "I almost thought you had disappeared." His presence was unsettling. Jake had always been charming and charismatic, but at that moment, there was something darker in his expression. A glimmer that made me feel he knew more than he was willing to share. "I just needed some time to think," I said, trying to stay calm, while the figure in the window still danced in my mind. "Shouldn't you be working? I have my priorities too, and you, my dear, are one of them." He stepped closer, the tone of his voice turning more serious. "You're not telling me everything, are you?" A wave of discomfort ran down my spine. He was watching me as if he could read every thought forming in my head. The figure in the window seemed to be calling me, but I couldn't let that show to Jake. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just trying to adjust to this place," I replied, trying to divert my gaze. "Oh, of course, the new apartment and the new life. But you can't ignore what's happening here." He gestured toward the window, and my heart skipped a beat. "You've involved yourself in stories you shouldn't. The missing woman, right? It's better if you don't get wrapped up in things you can't understand." "How do you know about that?" I couldn't contain the disbelief in my voice. "Are you telling me that just because I'm new here, I can't investigate what happened to someone who lived in this building?" Jake took a step forward, and I involuntarily stepped back. The atmosphere was thick with tension that I couldn't ignore. He was closer than I wanted him to be, and his gaze was penetrating. "You don't understand." He paused, as if weighing his next words. "Some things are better left in the past. The woman who disappeared, people don't talk about her for a reason. Do you really want to know what happened? What you might uncover?" "I need to find out, Jake. Something is wrong." My voice came out firmer than I intended, but the determination within me was growing. And you know more than you're saying. In that moment, his expression changed. The arrogance was replaced by a shadow of concern. He looked down, as if evaluating what to say next. I didn't know if this was a sign of weakness or if he was just playing a psychological game. You have no idea what you're doing. He raised his gaze, and there was something threatening in his voice. I don't want you to get hurt. It's not worth it. Not worth it? I laughed, a nervous chuckle. A person's life isn't worth it. Are you saying I should ignore this and move on? Sometimes moving on is the only option, he insisted, but his tone was becoming more aggressive. And believe me, you don't want to know what really happened. You have no idea. That irritated me. How could he say I had no idea? I was experiencing something profound and disturbing, and Jake was there, like an obstacle, trying to keep me from discovering the truth. There was a growing urgency within me, a desire to confront him and force him to speak. Why are you so worried? I asked defiantly. Do you have something to hide? Jake laughed, but it wasn't a joyful laugh. It was a cold laugh, full of contempt. You really think this is about me? You're the new tenant, the newcomer who wants to fit in. But you don't know what hole you're digging yourself into. At that instant, I felt the air grow denser. The figure in the window seemed to pulse in my mind, and the memory of the burned diary hit me hard. It was as if the missing woman was trying to warn me about Jake, about what he really was. My instinct screamed that I needed to get away, but the words came out before I could think. You can't intimidate me, Jake. I'm not a child. I will uncover the truth, no matter what you do. He moved closer still, and the tension between us intensified. Fear began to mix with anger, and I knew I was on dangerous ground. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, almost whispering. People disappear for reasons you can't imagine. Are you threatening me? I asked, my heart racing. The instinct for survival began to take over, and I knew I had to get out of there. The figure in the window was becoming more intense, more real, almost as if it were calling my name. No, it's not a threat. It's a warning. You don't know what might happen if you continue down this path. He leaned in, as if he wanted to make sure I heard him. I'll be around, and when you realize you're in danger, it will be too late. At that moment, he pushed me. The movement was quick and unexpected, and I nearly lost my balance. The force sent me toward the window, and everything in me screamed to hold on. I managed to grab the windowsill, looking down at the void below. Fear gripped me, but at the same time, there was a growing determination. The figure in the window was there, watching me, and it was not just a figment of my imagination. Watch out! I shouted, not knowing if I was directing it at him or the figure that seemed more real than ever. You can't push me like that. Jake stepped back, but in his gaze was something like a challenge. He didn't seem remorseful, and I realized there was an abyss between us, a space that could never be filled. He was becoming an enemy, and the truth I sought was closer than I could have ever imagined. You should ask yourself why you're so obsessed with this. He said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Some things are better when they remain buried. You can't stop me, Jake. #### I will uncover the truth, no matter what you do. The words came out with more force than I expected, and I realized I was ready to face whatever was coming. He watched me, and for a brief moment, his confident facade faltered. There was a chill in the atmosphere, as if the very building was watching us, waiting for the next move. I knew I was at a crossroads. The figure in the window seemed closer, clearer, and her presence echoed what I needed to understand. Go ahead, he said, his voice almost dismissive. But don't say I didn't warn you. What you're searching for could become your worst nightmare. With that, the tension between us became palpable. The air was heavy with secrets, and the figure in the window seemed to be waiting for me, as if the truth was finally about to be revealed. I could no longer hesitate. The discovery I had been seeking was within reach, and I was ready to confront whatever it was. The figure in the window was clearer than ever, as if the storm outside had brought a supernatural illumination. The moonlight filtered through the clouds, revealing details that were previously hidden. I watched her with a mixture of fear and curiosity, increasingly convinced that she was not just a product of my imagination, but something much more real and, at the same time, tragic. The expression on her face was one of pain and despair, as if she were trapped between two worlds, pleading for help. I felt my heart race in my chest as the figure approached the window, the glass between us seeming almost translucent. It was as if I could touch her pale, sad face, as if she wanted me to understand her story. "Why are you showing me this?" I murmured to the figure, but she did not respond. She remained there, motionless, looking directly at me, as if she knew I was the only one who could hear her call. It was then that I heard a gentle knock at the door. "Hey, dear. Are you home?" Agnes's voice cut through the heavy silence of my apartment. I could feel the tension in my body, like a string about to snap. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone, especially not to Agnes, who seemed to know more than I wanted her to. Yet the figure in the window was still watching me, and I knew I couldn't ignore the need for answers. "Yes, Agnes, I'm here," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady as I stepped away from the window. The image of the woman was still fresh in my mind, but I knew I needed Agnes's help. She entered my apartment, her warm presence contrasting with the cold that surrounded me. Agnes's gaze, always kind, was now filled with concern. "You look pale, dear. Is everything okay?" She stepped closer, placing a comforting hand on my arm. "Are you still thinking about that woman?" Yes. The figure in the window appeared again. I hesitated, searching for the right words. "She looks so sad, Agnes. I feel like she's trying to tell me something." Agnes frowned, her gaze drifting to the window as if she sensed the figure's presence too. "She's trying to communicate, that's for sure. But you need to understand that her story is much more complex than it seems. I was friends with her, you know." "You knew her?" I asked, curiosity overcoming my fear. "What happened to her? Why did she disappear?" Agnes's expression turned somber, and she took a deep breath before continuing. "Her name was Laura. She was a very special woman, full of life. But there was something dark in her life, something that surrounded her. People in the building began to notice that she was changing, that something was wrong. And then, one day, she simply disappeared." "Disappeared?" I repeated, trying to process the information. "How did that happen? Didn't anyone do anything?" "No one knew what to do, dear. Laura withdrew from everyone, and when we finally realized something was wrong, it was too late. But there were rumors, whispered stories among the residents." Agnes looked down, her voice low and sad. "They say she had a secret. Something that was following her, like a shadow that never let her be at peace." "A secret?" I furrowed my brow, the connection between Laura and my own life beginning to form in my mind. What could be so terrible? She was involved in something she shouldn't have been. A relationship with a man who wasn't who he said he was. I don't know all the details, but I can tell you that she was scared. Agnes raised her gaze to me, her eyes filled with concern. She told me, before she vanished. She said someone was watching her. That she felt she wasn't alone, even when she was. Those words resonated in my mind. I knew exactly what it felt like to feel someone watching me, a sensation that had haunted me since I moved into that apartment. "Agnes, I feel that too. Ever since I got here, I have this feeling that someone is watching me. As if I'm being followed." Agnes's expression became more intense. "That's not good, dear. It could be that Laura is trying to warn you. You need to be careful and not let fear take over." She stepped closer to me, her hand still on my arm. I want to help. We can find out more about what happened to her. And who knows, maybe we can also discover what is haunting you. Do you really think that can help us? I asked, hope beginning to emerge amidst the panic. Maybe if we know more about Laura, we can understand what's happening to me. Absolutely. Agnes nodded, her expression determined. Let's look for more information. I have some newspaper clippings that talk about her disappearance. We can start there. As Agnes moved away to get the clippings, my gaze involuntarily returned to the window. The figure was still there, now more diffuse but clearly present. I felt she was calling me, and a wave of compassion washed over me. Laura, I whispered, I'm here. I want to help you. Agnes returned with a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings, her hands trembling slightly as she handed the papers to me. Here, look. These are some of the articles I wrote about the case. They talk about the disappearance, the rumors, all of it. I began to flip through the clippings, each page revealing a new piece of the puzzle surrounding Laura. Look at this, I said, reading aloud. She was last seen on the night of an event in the building. They say there was a fight between her and a man. I looked at Agnes, my heart racing. Do you think this man could be the reason for what happened to her? Agnes nodded slowly, her gaze darkening. It's possible. Some people believe she knew secrets she shouldn't have. And that this put her in danger. Secrets. I murmured, the connection between Laura's story and my own life becoming clearer. What if those secrets are still here? What if Laura is trying to warn me about something that is still happening? We need to find out more about that man, Agnes replied, her voice firm. And we need to do it soon. We can't let what happened to Laura happen again. The figure in the window seemed more distant, as if she was waiting for me to make a decision. An urgent need to understand the truth propelled me. Let's do it, Agnes. Let's find out what happened to Laura and why she's calling me. In that moment, I knew I was ready to face whatever was lurking in the shadows, not just for Laura, but for myself. The truth needed to come to light, and I was willing to fight for it, no matter the cost. The afternoon light filtered through my apartment window, but the atmosphere was heavy, as if the air was charged with electricity. I knew I had to confront Jake, but the thought of facing that cold, calculating gaze unsettled me. After everything I had discovered about the missing woman and my personal connection to the story, there was no turning back. The truth was closing in, and I needed answers. Hashtag. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. The image of the figure in the window was still fresh in my mind, a constant reminder that I wasn't alone in this search. With Agnes's help, I had prepared a plan. Whatever Jake knew about my sister, I needed to find out. I steeled myself and headed toward the office where Jake spent long hours. The environment was quiet, except for the sound of fingers tapping on a keyboard and distant murmurs of voices. He didn't notice my entrance, absorbed in his work. The instinct to fight or flee pulsed within me, but I needed to be resolute. Jake. I called, trying to keep my voice steady, though I felt a tremor betraying my nervousness. He looked up, a smile that seemed more like a mask than a reflection of happiness. Hey! What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at home resting a bit? The question sounded casual, but there was a tension in his tone. Actually, I came to talk to you about the woman who disappeared. The mention of the topic made his smile falter for a brief moment, but he quickly regained it. Oh, that again. You really should let it go. It's an old case, it's not worth getting so involved, he said, averting his gaze back to the computer screen. But it is worth it, Jake. I discovered things you can't imagine. I felt adrenaline surging. Agnes told me you were close to her, that you knew her well. What do you know about what happened? He closed his eyes for a moment, as if weighing his words. Look, I only knew her by sight. We weren't that close. I don't know what happened, and I really don't want to get involved in rumors. That's a lie. I said, frustration spilling over. Agnes told me you were friends with her. You were in the same circles. Why are you dodging this conversation? What are you afraid of? Jake stood up abruptly, his tone shifting to a more authoritative one. It's not about fear, it's about protecting you. There are things better left unknown, and I don't want you to get hurt by getting involved with this. Protecting? Or hiding the truth? I retorted, feeling rage building inside me. You're hiding something, and I won't stop until I find out what it is. He hesitated, as if battling an internal storm. You don't know what you're saying. This story is more complex than it seems. If you keep digging, you could end up getting hurt. I'm already hurt, Jake. I shouted, frustration boiling over as my heart raced. You have no idea what I've been through. The figure that appears in the window, the sleepless nights, all of this is because of her. She's trying to communicate with me, and I need answers. If you know something, it's time to stop hiding. He looked at me, his expression slowly shifting from indifference to something darker. You really shouldn't get involved with this. It's not safe. There are people who don't want the truth to come out. How can you say that? I asked, my voice less steady but still determined. You're acting like you're afraid of something. What do you know about the woman who disappeared? He took a deep breath, as if he had made a decision. Look, I'm not saying you should give up, but you need to understand that not everything is simple. The woman, she had problems. And the people close to her were involved in things they shouldn't have been. Problems? What kind of problems? Curiosity and anger mixed within me, and I couldn't look away from him. She was in a dangerous relationship. And I'm not just talking about a common romance. There were dark things. Things that might have led to what happened. He hesitated, as if wrestling with a sea of memories. She was a good person, but there were shadows around her. If you know anything specific, then you need to tell me. I insisted, taking a step closer. What did you do, Jake? He stepped back, his eyes narrowing. You don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do anything. I just knew her. Was her friend, but I can't get involved. You don't understand what's at stake. So you knew she was in danger and did nothing? I pressed, indignation rising. You're an accomplice, Jake. If you know something was wrong, you should have acted. You should have helped. He seemed agitated, running a hand through his hair. You don't know what it's like to be in the middle of this. People aren't always what they seem. You can't just look at a situation and think you understand everything. It's more complicated than that. Then tell me what it is. I pleaded, feeling a wave of desperation wash over me. What happened to her? Why did she disappear? Because things got out of control, he shouted, finally losing his composure. She got involved in something she shouldn't have. It's not that easy to get out of a situation like that. I can't talk about it anymore, and you shouldn't get involved. At that moment, I realized I was dealing with someone who was much more involved than he wanted to admit. There was a deep fear in his posture, something he was trying to hide. Jake, you need to be honest with me. What do you know about what happened to her? You're leaving me in the dark, and that's not fair. He looked at me, his eyes now filled with a mix of anger and fear. You're not ready to hear the truth. You don't understand that some truths are deadly. What happened to her wasn't an accident, and the last thing I want is for you to become the next victim. His words echoed in the room, and a chill ran down my spine. What do you mean by that? Are you implying I'm in danger? I'm just saying that the truth can be dangerous. He replied, his voice now lower, almost grim. And you shouldn't play with fire. I felt a wave of anger and desperation. So you admit you know something but don't want to tell me? You can't just dodge like this, Jake. I won't let this go. He stepped closer, and I felt a wave of tension. You need to understand that I care about you. I don't want you to get hurt. Please, don't go down this path. You care. Or are you just trying to protect yourself? I challenged, emotions swirling within me. Because I can't see the difference between you trying to protect me and covering up the truth. Jake fell silent, and the tension stretched between us like a thread about to snap. You can't force me to talk, and I can't stand here arguing with you about this. You need to leave, now. I felt a wave of despair. He was pushing me away from something I needed to understand. Looking into his eyes, I realized there was more there than he was willing to reveal. If you love the truth, Jake, then you need to tell me what you know. I won't stop until I find out what happened, and you can help me. He hesitated, the internal struggle clearly visible on his face. But then something changed, and I realized he was just trying to protect himself. I can't, he finally said, almost in a whisper. It's more complicated than you can imagine. But I'm part of this now. I affirmed firmly. And I can't just walk away. If you know something, you have to tell me. I can't live with this doubt. He looked at me, and for a brief moment, I saw a glimpse of the truth he was hiding. But then, as if he had made a decision, he retreated again, his gaze hardening. You won't understand. It's better to let this go. Frustration consumed me, and I felt like I was losing the battle. You don't know. You don't know what it's like to lose someone, what it feels like to carry the pain of not knowing the truth. And if you really care, then tell me what happened. He turned away from me, the tension between us palpable. You can't pressure me, the revelation I feared and desired at the same time was about to unfold before me. The atmosphere in my apartment had become unbearable, laden with a weight that suffocated me. Confronting Jake, which until that moment seemed a simple matter of professional rivalry, was now revealing itself as something much deeper and darker. ##### The hatred and pain I felt intertwined, forming a storm inside me, ready to explode. As soon as I saw the figure in the window, a chill ran down my spine. She was clearer than ever. The features of my face reflected in the eyes of the woman I had only seen as a shadow were now becoming vivid. It was my sister. The shock nearly made me lose my balance, and I braced myself against the wall to keep from falling. I looked at the figure, now a palpable presence, and my sister's voice echoed in my thoughts, making my heart race. Please, help me, she seemed to whisper, and the anguish in her expression was almost unbearable. I will uncover the truth, I murmured to myself, determination growing within me. But I knew I had to confront Jake first. He had to pay for what he had done. Jake was there, his cold, calculating eyes watching me as if I were prey and he, the predator. He approached, a look of disdain plastered on his face. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice laden with irony. Still trying to figure out what happened to the missing woman. Rage boiled in my veins. You know far more than you're letting on, Jake. I saw the figure in the window. I know she's my sister. The last word escaped like a scream, echoing off the apartment walls. He hesitated, a fraction of a second that felt like an eternity. Your sister. He laughed, but there was no humor in his laughter. You're crazy. The woman who disappeared has nothing to do with you. Shut up. I shouted, my voice choked with emotion. You knew her. You were with her. What did you do to her, Jake? He stepped back, a glimmer of nervousness flashing in his eyes. You don't know what you're talking about. This is dangerous, you shouldn't get involved. Dangerous? Indignation consumed me. Dangerous is what you did. I will uncover the truth, and you can't stop me. Jake advanced, his face now close to mine. You don't understand what you're saying. The truth can be more complicated than you imagine. Then tell me the truth. I demanded, feeling adrenaline surge through my body. What happened to my sister? He hesitated again, the mask of confidence starting to crumble. She was getting involved with the wrong people. I tried to help, but things got out of control. Out of control. Incredulity washed over me. You killed her, didn't you? You killed her and made it look like an accident. You can't hide that forever. The silence between us was electric. The tension was palpable, and I could feel my sister's presence watching me, as if urging me to continue. Jake's gaze hardened, and his expression morphed into a mix of anger and fear. You don't know what you're talking about, he growled, but his voice trembled. You don't know how she was. She was drowning in things she shouldn't have been. I only did what I had to do. You did what you had to do. The disdain in my voice was evident. You pushed her to her death. And now you think you can get away with it. You think you can go on with your life as if nothing happened. He moved even closer, rage spilling over. You have no idea what I went through. I loved your sister. You don't know what it's like to lose someone you love. If you really loved her, you would have protected her. I screamed, pain and anger intertwining in my chest. You destroyed her, and now it's time for you to pay for that. Jake seemed to hesitate, his confidence starting to waver. The figure in the window appeared to intensify, her eyes fixed on me, as if she were telling me not to back down. I needed to be strong. I needed to be her voice. I won't let you get away with this, I declared, determination firm in my voice. I will take this further. I will tell everyone about you and what you've done. At that moment, something changed in Jake. Desperation overtook his gaze, and he began to move toward me, as if about to attack. If you do that, you won't just hurt yourself. You could put yourself in danger. There are things you don't understand. And there are things you can't hide. I shouted back, my heart racing. The truth always comes to light, Jake. Always. He hesitated, and I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. That's when the figure in the window became even clearer, and I realized she was there not just as a specter of the past, but as a force guiding me. My sister was with me, and her presence gave me courage. You need to face what you've done, I said, my voice calmer now, but still firm. You can hide for a while, but the truth is relentless. And I will bring it to light. Jake looked at me, his face contorting in an expression that blended anger and desperation. You don't know what you're doing, he growled, but the words sounded empty. I know very well, I replied, with a certainty I hadn't felt before. And I'm ready to face the consequences. The figure in the window seemed to nod, as if encouraging me. I was not alone. With the strength of the truth and the memory of my sister by my side, I knew I could confront anything. You can't stop me, Jake, I concluded, my voice echoing in the heavy air of the apartment. And one day, you will pay for what you did. And then, with renewed determination, I turned my back on him and walked toward the door. I knew the path ahead would be difficult, but it didn't matter. The truth was within my reach, and I wouldn't rest until it was revealed. I was no longer the victim haunted by doubt. I was a woman in search of justice, and nothing could deter me.